Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen Tang. I'm the managing partner of Morrison Foerster's Singapore office. Very glad that you could join us today, so thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we get started. So the session today is for an hour, and we'll be sharing stories and insights on the panel as well as answering questions. So if you would like to ask a question at any point, please use the Q&A button on the edge of the screen. So a year or two ago, we the firm launched a thought leadership initiative called the General Counsel Redefined. And it was really about providing the resources and the network to support our general counsel clients in their evolving roles. And then, you know, COVID-19 happened. And so our last few events have really been about leadership for our general counsel community, and specifically addressing the issues created or exacerbated by this pandemic. And in our conversations with clients, people expressed a very high level of interest in having the specific session that we're having today about navigating the mental health of themselves, of the legal teams that they lead, and other stakeholders within the company. And really, this is such an unprecedented time where I know that many of you and your teams are being asked to take on so many new responsibilities, make unprecedented decisions, and to lead in ways that, you know, no one ever really contemplated before. And all this while each of us, we're struggling with all of the other stuff, right? The isolation, the fatigue, the home-based learning for the children, you know, taking care of seniors, just the worry, everything else. And so really, it's about how we're able to find ourselves in all this, to put a name to sort of the mental pressure that we're facing, to identify it and help to create an environment for the people that we lead as well as our stakeholders in coming out of all this as well as we can. And so with that, let me introduce you to our speakers for today. Our guest general counsel today is Jeffrey Tan. Jeffrey has over 25 years of both private practice and in-house legal experience with both international law firms and multinationals. He is the Group General Counsel and Chief Sustainability Officer of SGX-listed Jardine Cycle and Carriage, where he is responsible for, and it's a very long list, legal, compliance, company secretarial, communications, and public affairs at the group level. And if that weren't enough, he is also the CEO of Mindset, which is the registered charity of Jardine Matheson that focuses on mental health. And so I know Jeffrey to be a powerful advocate for normalizing the conversation about mental health. And Jeffrey believes that a skilled general counsel not only needs to be a great business partner, but also needs to be able to positively influence the larger community, not just beyond just the law and business, which really makes him the perfect guest for our panel today. And so we're very, very honored to have him. So thank you, Jeffrey. And then Andy Stapleton in the floral shirt. So Andy has traveled the world for over 20 years, executing operational strategies for high stakes global events like the Olympic Games. And so with Andy's corporate background, she well understands how to get people working effectively together. And then subsequent to that, she qualified as a psychotherapist to drill down even further into these dynamics. And right now, she's practicing both in private practice and with corporates, where recently she's been helping her clients, including law firms and lawyers, to address a wide range of mental well-being issues, and particularly now coming out of the pandemic. And then we have Michelle Elstein, who's facilitating our session today. Some of you know her from the last few events that we've had on resilient leadership for general counsel. Michelle is the founder of Courageous Co. She's a corporate leadership coach. She has many years of private sector experience, including in the legal industry. And she's really focused on helping senior executives design their futures as resilient business leaders. And so with that, I'm going to hand you over to Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirin, and hello everybody, welcome. We're going to get really deep into discussion today, and it is intended to be a very interactive session. So as Shirin suggested, please use the Q&A. Our colleague Tracy is manning the Q&A, and she'll introduce your questions to the session. We've also got some online dialogue we want to start with you. So if you have a second device handy, a phone or something, keep it close. If not, don't worry. For today's session, we're looking at corporate mental health, corporate mental well-being, and we've got our discussion split into 3 parts. The first part is kind of how did we evolve to where we are today and where corporate mental health fits on the overall agenda. The second part is about all of you in the audience there and your role as leaders, whether it's leader of self, leader of others, leader with influence, leader of stakeholders, leader of team. You're all leaders in some different type of capacity. So it's all about you and the role you can play in your own and the mental well-being of others. And then the third part will be looking to the future as we move through this time into what comes next and what we need to look out for in terms of corporate mental health and corporate mental well-being. So that's the plan. Let's get stuck in. We're going to start with a question for Jeffrey. So in terms of thinking about how we've come from the past to the present. So Jeffrey, you set up Mindset 4 years ago and you're part of Wellness at Work. How have you seen the mental health agenda change over this time? And does it correlate to what you experience in your in-house GC role?
Sure, Michelle. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for spending the time to come around and interact with this panelists and to be able to focus on a very important topic about mental wellness. I think if we go back 4 or 5 years ago and you looked at the landscape in terms of mental health, probably very little was talked about in a very open fashion. Unlike any other disability or challenge of a physical nature, when you have a mental health challenge, it is totally unseen to anybody on the outside. And one of the big challenges, of course, is that when you do find a safe place to be able to talk about one's struggles, then you have this whole issue about stigma stepping in and people stepping away. I think what has been a silver lining in the COVID pandemic crisis is that suddenly this whole topic about mental health and mental wellness has been pushed up to the top of the agenda. People are talking about it openly. You do have forums like the ones that we are having today, or even in the office environment of governments talking about how important mental wellness is to be able to remain resilient to this pandemic and to be able to make sure that we are collectively able to meet this challenge. So just some observations in that regard, Michelle.
And how is it changing within Jardines over the time that you've been there to today as well?
Well, I think Jardines has been a conglomerate that has been involved in the mental health space for quite some time now. And you're probably asking why mental health? Primarily because when we looked about the landscape of things that we can be able to do to try and bring some impact into the community, the mental health space is actually very underserved. You would find there are lots of charities and programs that would talk about alleviation of the poor, of education, of youth, of poverty, but very few would want to focus on mental health or mental wellness. And so that's one of the things that we have sought to be able to put at the forefront to try and make an impact. So it's been a long journey. In the case of Singapore, Mindset has been set up since 2011. So this is our 9th year that we've been here. It's originated from Hong Kong, where our head office has had Mindset now for close to 10, 15 years, actually, in terms of this endeavor. Because again, we do believe quite passionately as a group that this is an important area to be able to focus our attention on.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Important work being done there, it sounds, across a whole different spectrum of offices and people. So let me come to you, Andy. So you're a psychotherapist and you work across different industries. How are you seeing corporate mental well-being challenges manifest at the moment? And are there any nuances to the legal profession when it comes to mental well-being challenges?
Well, I thank you, Michelle, and thank you for the invitation to attend this very important session. Well, I think, sort of 1 in 4 of us statistically suffer from mental health issues, but that 1 in 4 are the people that actually go to a doctor to seek help. And I think if it was a broken leg, we'd probably all be hobbling. We've all suffered some form of mental health challenge, be it low-level stress to high-level depression or whatever it might be. I think the current environment has really brought it, as Jeffrey said, into light. But unfortunately, in corporate life, there is this stigma in regards to coming forward and putting your hand up and saying it's actually I'm actually not okay. I think the nuances in regards to the legal profession. The adversarial nature of the legal profession, unfortunately, is very much, it compounds the fight and flight response. So it's a very stressful environment. And I think, as most of you know, the legal profession has a culture known for its imbalance of work and life. The perfectionist, driven people that it attracts into the industry. It all compounds the stress and the anxiety that can come out from working in this condition at the moment. I think what we've seen most of from my private practice, working with lawyers, and also in general, is the isolation. I think people are perhaps working a lot harder at home at the moment because there is no off button. You can just stay working. You wake up in the morning, straight to the office, in the next room. And what I am seeing is people are tending to work a lot harder, longer hours, weekends. And it's also very challenging. I think you mentioned in the beginning being at home. And I think Shirin said that as well, that the challenges that come with finding a space in your home to basically have some quiet periods is very difficult. But I think law in particular is very competitive. So in regards to the actual deliverables, the expectations, and also at the moment with COVID-19, job security, uncertainty, I think that's really compounding mental health and mental well-being at the moment. And unfortunately, lawyers do suffer mental health and substance abuse issues at a much higher rate than other professional people. And we have to be very aware of that, particularly from a company point of view, looking out for that and being able to reach out to lawyers who are now sort of out of the office environment at home and are perhaps having these issues compounded by COVID-19. And perhaps having some sort of issues, and I think establishing a clear channels of communication of how to reach those people is very important. And hopefully we'll look at what we can do about that as we go forward in the session today.
Thanks, Sandy. Yes, we are going to dig into what are some of the practical things that people can do to help themselves and help others. But that was a super helpful starting us off. Where are we in the world and what are people dealing with and what is showing up? So Shirin, let me come to you, and then we're going to go to an audience question. You've been leading the MoFo office through the last few months and all the challenges that bring with it. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but how has mental health moved up the agenda internally for you as a managing partner?
So I'm, in addition to sort of the managing partner role in the Singapore office, sorry, hang on a second. They're fogging outside my window. I'm gonna put my headset on and see whether that makes it better. Sorry, you guys. I'm also on the firm-wide mental health steering committee, and so it's both at the firm-wide level and in the Singapore office. Mental health has always been a top priority for us. It's not COVID-19 specific. Supporting mental health is important for us as a firm, and it's sort of a very natural fit with our existing values, a big one of which is inclusiveness, right? And so, and also, like Andy said, our expectation that people perform high quality work in a high pressure environment. And so we've been focusing on it since before COVID and even more so now. And so, with the pandemic, we've got sort of targeted specific resources, webinars for working parents. We gave everybody a free subscription to the Calm meditation app, various things. But I think for me, the biggest impact has been not any of the very technical resources, but just the fact that leadership is acknowledging it and putting, saying it, right? And so the Mental Health Steering Committee sends weekly emails to everyone, lawyers and staff, and in a very approachable tone. And the responses that we've gotten back have been so powerful. One of them basically said, I started to cry as I read this email because it's everything that I'm feeling. And it's so helpful to know that other people are feeling the same thing. So thank you for that message. And, it'll encourage you, the committee, knowing that, as you go into the weekend, knowing that you've made someone feel a little better. And so really it's that, just acknowledging it, I think, has been a big difference.
And to what extent does that manifest in relationships day to day, or is there something more positive you're seeing or feeling in the environment? What are you seeing as a result of the effort that leadership is putting in?
There's definitely more of an awareness of it. We're not entirely there yet. We're having, we're conducting sort of best practices training for everyone from leadership down, everyone, right? About how to support colleagues, including sort of the suggested framework for how do you even broach these topics. It's not a conversation that comes naturally to most people, things like that. And so just raising the awareness, I think that's been a positive effect. Thanks,
Shirin. So I'd like to go straight to audience participation for a moment. So if you've got a phone, grab your phone. I'm going to ask you a question. Andy's already alluded to, depression, anxiety, stress. We've heard about isolation. We're interested to know, what are the issues that are cropping up in your organizations? So if I invite you to get your mobile phone, or if you're on your phone, just open a web browser. If you're on your laptop, just open a web browser and go to menti.com. And I invite you to enter the code 177477. This is completely anonymous, so nobody will know who's saying what. We're interested to know the top 3 issues which are manifesting or showing up in your organization. So literally people struggling because they are by themselves, anxiety and concern, stress and pressure, depression, low self-esteem, isolated professionally, away from colleagues, away from conversation, away from learning and osmosis and support, and then perhaps other issues, but you're not necessarily sure what they are. So I invite you to share your thoughts. How these manifest might be substance abuse or overworking or no boundaries that Andy talked about, but these are the underlying drivers of the mental wellbeing challenges. So if you'd like to participate, the top 3, and then the panel will reflect on these. Thank you for whoever started this off. About 10 people have entered so far. Please do feel free to keep going. So at the moment, we've got about half the about a third of the audience have participated so far. Do feel free to keep going. Let's see what's showing up here. I mean, it looks pretty clear that stress and anxiety are standing out quite strongly above the rest, and then isolation. So Andy, if I come to you, how does this resonate with what you're seeing, and how can stress and anxiety show up so that we can spot signs of it either in ourselves or in our colleagues?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, obviously, the stress, it doesn't surprise me, or the high score of the anxiety. I think 61% of lawyers have suffered some form of anxiety in regards to this current environment. And I think it's trying to understand stress and anxiety, that we feel a lot more comfortable saying I'm stressed or anxious. It's more of a vocabulary that we're used to saying as a bypass, or I'm a bit stressed today, a bit anxious today. What interests me is the 7th, which is the other issues but I can't diagnose. Sometimes we feel things and we're not sure what they are because there is no vocabulary. We're not really taught to express emotions. So we put it in the bucket of stress and anxiety because that's a bit more palatable, but it's trying to recognize the other underlying issues, be it substance abuse, not sleeping, whatever it might be, and also the low mood of depression, suicidal thoughts, as I said, substance abuse. I think the fact that with anxiety, remembering anxiety is largely anticipationary, what we call anticipationary anxiety of what's going to happen, and that sort of correlates with what I said before. There's a lot of uncertainty with job security, or do I go back to work, do I go back into the office? That amount of anticipationary anxiety is very prevalent at the moment because we don't really know what's happening. One minute we're locked down, the next minute we're starting to open up, and our governments are giving different messages. So I think that it's a really good reflection here. The isolation, unfortunately, is very prevalent. And this is one thing I'm really looking at in regards to how companies can try to engage people so that we feel that we are part of a team and we have a feeling of collaboration, whereas when we're working by ourselves in our home environment, there's a real feeling of disconnect. So we're looking at ways that companies can reach out to employees to try to get them to feel that they are part of something. So I think this is a very good reflection, but I do wonder, with the lower scores of the other issues but I can't diagnose, I'd like to be able to get into those a little bit more, because sometimes we can't say how we feel, because it feels very nebulous, and we don't have vocabulary to express it.
That's really interesting, in terms of people don't know what they don't know, but they can feel something and they can't articulate it. That's a really good way to put it. Let me come to you, Jeffrey. With the work that Mindset's doing, to what extent does the results of the poll on the screen here relate to what Mindset is seeing, do you know, or even what you're seeing in your in-house role?
I think certainly stress and anxiety is there. It's just in the atmosphere as a result of the pandemic itself. But I think particularly, in my observation, is probably affecting lawyers more so, and this is what I suggest as to why it's probably affecting us more. Lawyers tend to want to have a certainty, want to have a predictability, and those of us who've gone to law school know that, when we go out and talk about how law develops, we always talk about precedents. There's something that we can relate to give us our framework and our sense of security. This one, as in COVID-19, doesn't have a reference point. The closest is 100 years back in 1918 with the Spanish flu. But what it has done is that it's created a lot of uncertainty, adding on to the fact that those of us who are in legal general counsel roles are often the go-to persons in the corporations to say, well, you're the grown-up here. What do you think about this? You usually give us advice with regards to laws or regulations. What's your take on this? Or even a simple thing of what is the government saying about coming into office, and what are the things that you need to be able to clear, from temperature taking to declarations, all of which suddenly that additional stress, I think, has been piled on to those of us in leadership roles, trying to give guidance and trying to give a sense of stability. So I think that stress is there. Certainly, and speaking from my personal standpoint, I felt that going up quite tremendously over the last couple of months. Not so much the things that I don't know, but people expecting me to know about the things that I don't know. And I think that recognition certainly has been one of the things that I've been quite cognizant of, and I've been sharing that with my team to say that you really don't have to have all the answers. But I think collectively we'll try and find the answers as best as we can.
Thanks, Jeffrey. To things that leaders can do and how leaders can build, or the audience can build their mental resilience. Before we do that, I'm just going to come back to Andy. If these are the issues that are showing up, how can we look out for signs? So we might not spot substance abuse. We might spot if somebody's tired because they're not sleeping. But what are the signs that we can look out for to spot these things if they're becoming too much, or whatever the right expression is, before people have sort of gone too far without help? How do we look for the signs?
Well, I think it's interesting, avoidance, not being part of being on a video call but turning the camera off. I think that's one of the things that I have noticed, that in a company environment where someone consistently has their camera off because they don't want to be seen, they're not showing up in that regard. There might be, they're not sleeping and they're not looking after themselves, or wherever it might be. And also obviously from substance abuse. I think the fact that if you notice, and it's very difficult again in the legal profession because of the nuances of working very hard, but when someone's on the computer the whole time, they're always online, they don't switch off, 11 o'clock at night, emails, 1 o'clock in the morning, weekend work, noticing when someone is reluctant to take a break or take some time off. So for example, making sure that you take the weekend off, or at least one day on the weekend, and where leaders are noticing that people perhaps are not doing that and are working consistently through. So it's trying to watch, and it's very subtle signs, because unfortunately and as Jeffrey said, with the uncertainty that we're working with, people are working harder and are working more. So trying to spot signs is very difficult. One of the ways that we look for signs, and this is particularly more prevalent with men, women are far more open to talk about mental health, is with physical ailments. So what we're noticing, perhaps people having backache, shoulder ache, turning up, sort of keeping, going to the doctor, wanting, coming in with signs of migraine, headaches, not sleeping. It's the physical ailment that sometimes can be manifested because people are reluctant to say, I feel depressed or I feel stressed, because that can be seen as a weakness. As Jeffrey said at the beginning, it's stigmatized. So coming in, and it's sort of more palatable to say, I've got really bad shoulder pain and back pain, I'm not sleeping because of that, as opposed to I'm feeling a loss of direction and depressed.
Thanks, Andy. Just scribbling some notes there for a question later. That sort of brings us through where we are today, what people are experiencing, where the mood music is, what to look out for. Let's think about our audience in terms of leaders. Before I do, though, Tracy, can I just ask, are there any questions you want to throw in from the audience at the moment?
Yes, we have a question I think would be good for the panel to consider, which is, aren't we just treating the symptoms? How do we get to the root causes and deal with those, such as overload of work, long hours culture, feedback-free zones, etc.?
So perfect question, because we're looking at what can you as the audience do and influence to create the culture where we preserve mental health. So that's diving right in. What can we do to get in front of it? Jeffrey, are you okay if I come to you first on that one?
Sure. No, happy to share some thoughts about that. I guess as leaders, one of the things that we'll need to be able to do is to establish an environment of trust and confidence where our teams can be able to come to us and talk about these symptoms. Because if you don't talk about the symptoms, you can't be able to get to the root causes. Now, as far as overload, long hours, I think there's going to be a need for all of us to be able to recognize how easy it is to not have those bright lines. I think in the past, pre-COVID, even if you finish at 7 or 8 o'clock, you do have a definite time when you leave the office, you take a drive, you're in the MRT, you're on the way home, you have what I call a decompression time. You don't have that right now. For example, my bedroom to the study where I am right now is a 20-second stroll. I cannot decompress in 20 seconds. And I turn out at work earlier, I leave later, I miss my lunch hours. So I think that there's going to be a need for leaders to be able to create an environment where people can be able to talk about this, and not saying just I'm working longer hours, but why are you working on longer hours? Is there something that we can be able to do to try and help you through that? So I think that trust environment is there. Of course, I think as leaders, there's a need for us to have that compassion as well, to be able to understand the feedback that we're hearing, as opposed to, hey, you only work 12 hours. What's the problem? It should have been 14. I think then the other thing, of course, is this whole concept about holding out hope. What can we be able to do to improve, to make the situation better, and to be able to talk about this? Again, I don't know that all of us as leaders have all of the solutions and the answers, but I think if we create the environment to be able to have that dialogue, I think that's an important first step.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Shirin, I'm going to come to you next and then to Andy. So with the MoFo, the Mental Wellbeing and the Wellness Steering Committee, you've talked about a few things that you've offered already, the Calm app, and there are things that you want to do. If you could do whatever you wanted, what are the sorts of things that you would like to do to create that environment, that context, that safe cultural space for your colleagues?
So I think there's a couple of things. The question was a good one. I mean, you know, root cause, right? Some things don't change. And for us, I mean, we're a law firm, clients are demanding, you guys know that. But, you know, so for us, you know, we're busy, that's fortunate, but, you know, that sort of pace, that sort of pressure, that environment, that's just going to be there. And it's like Jeffrey said, it's how we create a safe place to talk about it. And also we encourage people to take the, you know, carve out their own time from that, right? To actually recharge, to do what they need to in order to be, you know, to sustain themselves in that sort of environment. And so a couple of things that have been helpful coming out of the training and the conversations we're having at the firm. And one is really just for people that are leading teams, for people that are in positions where, you know, you are leading or you're instructing. It's been very helpful just to have a greater awareness of your own impact. And so I'll give you an example that really resonated with me. One of the partners who's with me on the steering committee, she said that she's become much more aware of the impact that she has on her associates, right? Like me, she's a mom of with young children, and we send emails late at night, you know, after the kids have gone to bed, and that's our, you know, quiet time to work. But her associates felt that they needed to be on standby when she came online. And so they would actually wait and see when she would be there. And then they would feel the need to respond to emails. And so it's the same for me. I'm happy to work on Friday nights or weekends when my son is, you know, with his dad, right? And, you know, but just sort of being aware of the impact that I have on other people, to get an email from me at, you know, 8 p.m. on a Friday night, and not telling them when I expect the work. And so it's just made me more aware, and I think a lot of other people as well, to say, well, I'm sending this now, but you don't have to do this now, you know, don't do it until Monday or what. But be more mindful about the impact that each of us has on whoever's receiving our emails, our instructions. That's one thing. And then the other thing I think that's been helpful is for leaders to model vulnerability. And a number of very senior parts that the firm has with mental health, and you know, they are leaders of practice groups, right? They are successful, powerful people who are managing these things as they go, and so sort of just being very open about everything else that you yourself, you know, are struggling with. I think it's helpful to others to open up about those things.
Actually, so there's a real empathy, vulnerability, self-awareness. I think that's absolutely critical. Let me come to you, Andy. What are the conversations we can be having to get in front of the mental health issues, to the root of it, as Shirin said? So we're hearing lots of things here. What else do you think we could be talking about, having conversations, or even in the context of the environment, when the lawyers are working in-house and they're facing all these challenges coming in all directions? What can we do to get?
I think one word: listen. Be able to have an open channel of communication where you have an ability to go to someone and they will listen to you. I think that's the beauty of obviously clinical psychologist, is that we are there to listen, and sometimes anxiety is very different. So sometimes we get a bit afraid of mental health, and we step in and say, well, you need to do mindfulness and you need to do meditation, and it does work for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for some. If you tell someone who's anxious to focus on their breathing, it's the worst thing you can say. Yeah, just focus on your breathing. It works. We need us to be able to listen, being able to hold someone and just, I'm just lost, and then be able to understand within your own company what support is available. We are not superheroes. It's very difficult for us to be able to confidentiality enough, talk about the fear of being found out, and being able to open this clear channel of communication in regards to it's confidential. Is just so important. So we need to understand everyone's individual experience of mental health, because it's also different. It's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all. So that would be my big thing, is listen to understand, not to reply.
And I think I certainly have learned this over the years, to hold my tongue and say nothing. You're just here to listen.
Yep.
And sometimes people can be able to appreciate just listening, not advice.
Yes. I think that's so glad you said that, Jeffrey. I didn't want to. It's just so important, because what happens in that first sentence is, no, I'm fine, and then you give it some space, and then what comes into the next conversation is, actually, I'm not fine. But we need to allow that to come through. Yeah, well said.
So what I'm hearing here is that there's a whole set of mindsets that we need to adopt to be open to what someone else needs to bring. Yeah. So therefore the behavior is to listen without judgment. Yeah. To demonstrate vulnerability, which manifests behavior in terms of sharing. The empathy as a mindset, which will manifest in behaviors of kindness. So there's lots of different mindsets that then manifest in different behaviors. And the notion that sticks with me, and we're doing a ton of resilience work at the moment, is this notion of what Andy just encapsulates as creating space. If we give people the space, they can process and they can share. Now, equally, we need to self-lead. We need to create space for ourselves to have the awareness of what's happening with us, because if we're not okay, we can't look out for others. A bit like when you go on the aeroplane, take your oxygen first. So we need to look after ourselves. So I'd like to go back to an audience question again before we come back to the panel, and ask the audience, what kind of things do you do that work for you, that are helping you preserve your own mental health? There's no right, there's no wrong. This is sharing. We can get ideas from each other. Oh, people have already started it. Well done. Excellent, everybody. Thank you. So if you go back onto Menti, what's working for you to help develop your mental well-being and your mental resilience? This is, again, completely anonymous. Completely anonymous. So we'll see what comes up, and I'll ask the panel to reflect and comment again on what's cropping up, and see if there are other things that you can offer or suggest, bearing in mind what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another, and you shouldn't copy anyone else. So we've got rest, sleeping are very helpful, blocking time to take breaks, having a regimen for exercise, yoga, making sure you take your holidays and doing something different to break the monotony. Focused breaks, that's really nice in terms of making sure that they happen. We've got gym, swimming, having a meal, hiking, and maybe Andy will touch on this, but science and research show the benefit between exercise and the brain, and the regeneration of the brain. We've got time out to recharge with a bit of Netflix. I love a bit of Netflix. When I'm feeling burnout, I also go to Netflix sometimes. There's lots of stuff coming through on the screen here. While it's coming through, Andy, if I come to you, Of the what you're seeing here, any thoughts, comments, other things that you would suggest? Not to tell people what to do, it's not about that, but just thoughts and the benefits of some of these things that people are trying.
I'd like to say the importance of a boundary, having a boundary. So you wake up in the morning, intention today is to stop work as best I can at around 7 o'clock, or having a 1 hour or 30-minute lunch break. So the intention of the day is to make sure I do something, exercise. So you're setting an intention at the beginning of the day, because I think the boundary, it's so easy. We get caught up in an email flow and we just keep going and keep going. But actually setting a boundary by having an alarm that, you know, at lunchtime, and you get up and you move, you stretch, you go to the gym, you work, you walk in the garden, whatever it is, but you take those little breaks. I call them pause practices, where we just mentally just breathe and just breathe. Just give yourself that moment to pull back, re-establish, refocus, and come back down. And again, and just asking yourself, one question I always say to my clients is, how are you kind to yourself? When was the last time you did something that was kind? Well, what do you mean? I said, well, when was the last time you know, had a massage, or you went out and had a nice bath? Oh, I don't have time to do that. And we're quite harsh on ourselves, and we will give to everybody else in our family, and we'll tell our friends, you should be taking a holiday, you shouldn't work on the weekends. But self matters. I think we need to take care of ourselves, as you rightly said on the aeroplane. But what's coming through is the breaks, movement, blocking time. It's so important to put these boundaries in place, and just to turn off the laptop. And one thing I really want to emphasize here is sleep. Exponentially, we are seeing a real problem with sleep at the moment in the UK from a mental health perspective, due to anxiety and stress over COVID-19. And unless we get enough sleep, the brain does not have enough time to regenerate itself. It's like a little cleaning system at night, and if we're not having enough sufficient sleep. So if you are having sleep problems, there are some fantastic apps. There are some great sleep hygiene methods that you can use, just to make sure that you are looking after your sleep. But I love the fact someone's written laughter. We so need to laugh. Oh, yeah, Netflix is good for that. So yeah, boundaries, I would say, really trying to the intention in the morning. What can I set as an intention to give myself a break? And even if we start off with 30 minutes, just having that break to cut midday, fabulous. It's a good start.
Thanks, Andy. Jeffrey, I want to come to you to see, have you got any reflections on what people are sharing? What do you do personally for your own mental well-being and resilience, if you don't mind me asking?
Sure. I think it is to be able to draw the lines. And that's probably the hardest thing to do in this particular time. And I'll explain why. Because if you think about it, as I was mentioning, you have to commute to the office, you have the time in the office, you have the decompression. Because now you're working from home, you don't have that. And because you're also in an environment where sometimes when you don't see your colleagues in the next room, in the office, you're wondering whether you're feeling excluded. And that does not help in terms of helping your own mental frame of mind itself. And I think one needs to be able to recognize those stresses. And so how do you then go out there and be able to recharge? We talked about breaks, and this is the interesting dilemma, right? Where would you go to for a vacation?
Mm-hmm.
in today's environment, Singapore is very small, but yet there are places that you could go to take a walk in the park, for example, go stand by the beach and hear the waves coming through. It's one way of trying to sort of have a different perspective to take your mind away from things. Exercise itself, I guess for myself, is to be able to stop becoming what I call a digital addict. Why do I say that? If I'm off the laptop, I'm on a video conference. If I'm off the video conference, I might be watching Netflix. It's still a device of sorts, and I need to be able to detox, because otherwise it's going to create a a bleeding into what I call my private space. And so one of the things that my wife has me do over the last couple of months is that I now charge my phone in a different room, because she said to me that you don't say goodnight to me, you say goodnight to your phone. You say good morning to your phone instead of saying good morning to me when you wake up. And so I'm trying those steps to try and have that separation from some of my devices to help myself put those bright lines.
Thank you for the candor there. Yeah, I love that. Say good night and good morning to people you love, not devices.
Yeah.
And actually, Andy and I run programs where we get into all sorts of different strategies and habits that people can consider and try, and the reasons why. And there's so much that people can do, and it's about finding what works for you. And putting in place those habits so that they become habits. Those boundaries become habits. The setting intentions becomes a habit. The device in another room becomes a habit. Anchoring when you're going to do exercise for you becomes a habit. Doing things that give you joy without feeling guilty becomes a habit, whether it's a 5-minute coffee, half an hour to get your nails done, whatever it might be. Imaging at different paces and stages around the world, and people in different companies will be experiencing differently if they're regional roles, global organizations, global teams, and so on. One of the things that comes up is people who have a a 5-minute coffee, half an hour to get your nails affect themselves, not let other people. So Andy, I'm going to come to you on this one, and then I'm going to come to Jeffrey and Shirin on more practical things about moving forward. But how do you preserve your own mental well-being when you're looking out for others and they clearly need help?
And I think that goes back to the earlier point I made, in that if you have awareness of someone maybe having some stress or anxiety, being able to listen but also understand that you're limited in your capacity. I think being able to really understand where you can go for help in order to offer that person help. So if you say to someone, you know, I've noticed that, you know, you're online on the weekend or whatever it might be, or you know, never offline or whatever it might be. It's being able to listen, but then also be able to look, there's a number, you can ring this, you know, can help, there is some support, this is some volunteer, so that you are able to not take it on board yourself, but being able to be aware of the support that you can give is very important. We all have our own individual experiences of stress, and it's very different for everybody else. So that's why I said before, being able to say, I know how you feel. We don't know how someone else feels, but having the empathy to understand in regards to just being able to listen. And it's a really small act of kindness that will make a difference. And the act of kindness is just saying, I've noticed perhaps that, you know, that you haven't been sleeping, or that you're not on the Zoom call much. Anything I can do, and let the person come in, and then be able to, in advance, to know what support you can given them. But I think the openness and the ability to make sure that person understands it's confidential. Only if they want you to take it any further will you, but you can offer some support. The non-judgment is very important. I think Shirin said a really important thing, where sometimes by sharing something personal that, you know, I've suffered my own level of stress, it's probably very different to what you experience, but I had a really tough time as well. But what helped me was, so I think being able to do that is so important. So thanks so much for saying that, Shirin, because I think it's a key thing in regards to supporting other people.
So empathy and listening, but being aware and equipped. And Jeffrey's going to take us through some resources that are available in Singapore before we get to the end. And then it sounds like also we want to empower people. So, you know, I notice you're on at night. What else could you be doing? What would enable you to turn it off? Try to empower them so we don't become a crutch to them. Okay, before I come back to Jeffrey and Shirin, Tracy, can I just check, are there any other questions that you want to contribute to the panel at the moment?
No, we don't have any right now. Thanks.
At the moment. Okay, so please do, if you have anything else that you want to ask, we've got to just about 10 minutes left. So we're looking forward. So we've come through pure crisis, we're in resilience phase, and we're moving into reboarding and what McKinsey are calling reimagination. We're going to work differently, and there's this term distributed working. So at the moment, in different places of the world, people have to work from home. So it's all work from home. It's not even that it's chosen virtual or remote working. It just has to be, and people are starting to move into office space again. And there's this notion of distributed working where people will, I think you mentioned, well, if someone's in the office, am I supposed to go in? If the leaders are there, should I be there? What if I'm not ready yet? And that will create a new set of challenges that we need to get in front of. So, Jeffrey, I know you've got your inclusion framework, and I wondered if this is a moment to draw on the inclusion framework and any key things that your charity is doing. That what are they suggesting to create the environments to help people move forward?
Yeah. So at the end of this this webinar itself, there will be some materials that will be shared about inclusion. But if I could just summarize what I call the 4 A's, if you don't remember anything over the hour that we've been chatting about mental health, think about this 4 A's. The first is awareness. As we would not send anybody into an environment that's physically unsafe, we should also be mindful of providing an environment where it is supportive from a mental wellness perspective. So that's the first A of awareness. The second is in terms of acceptance, because if we are going to create an environment where people feel safe enough to come around and talk to us about their struggles, then we should be able to accept them, as opposed to putting a label to stigmatize them and say that, there's really something wrong with this person because of ... The third A is in terms of activities. And I think particularly so in our current environment where we're all virtual, how can you be able to bring people together in terms of doing something together that can be able to bring them as a group and glue them with a sense of belonging. And then the final A will be in terms of assistance, because we cannot do all of this ourselves. And if we need to, there's a colleague, there's a support, obviously journey with them in our personal capacities, but we also should recognize the limitations there. So those are the 4 A's that I hope that when we come out on the other side of this pandemic, we'll have a change of mindset in the office space and the office.
Thank you. And I love the word belonging there, because when you feel that you belong to something, I'm part of a very close community, and it's an unbelievable support when you feel like you're in it together without judgment. Very powerful. So thank you also for sharing that. I just like that word a lot. Shirin, let me come to you. And MoFo, as you're bringing people to the office again and thinking about, you can barely think too far in front at any point in time, but what's really important for you for the safety, the mental well-being of your people on a practical level going forward?
I think it's continuing our focus on normalizing the conversation, right? So it's continuing with all of the resources and making sure that people know where the resources are. We have a page that we keep sending out, every week to say, okay, look, you have confidential counseling. There's, online coaching, and various links to different things. But really, I just come back to the interpersonal, just one-on-one, right? And we've talked a lot about the importance of listening, but it's not easy if you're not used to just reaching out and people are not used to telling you how they feel. It's difficult to actually initiate that conversation. And so for me, during the last few months, I've been going around calling or WhatsApping people one-on-one and sort of, how are you seems so trite now, and you will get a, yeah, it's fine, or, been better, or something like that. But by persisting and just sharing some of my own, struggles with everything, or just being approachable, right? In a very, it might not be institutional, in the best case it is, like at our firm, but also just one-on-one with people, and being there for them to feel safe to talk to you.
So you're creating the space in that intimate environment where people can be honest And again, it's still about that creating space that we talked about earlier. We're going to draw to an end shortly. I've got one final question for all of you before we ask Jeffrey to talk through some of the resources that are available to people, and then I hand back to you, Shirin. So, Tracy, if there are any final questions, let me know now before I go for the final question to the panel.
Yeah, we do. We have an interesting question. It's going back to the issue about looking for signs that people are struggling, especially in a remote environment. You've mentioned several, people not getting on video calls, not switching off late at night, etc. But how else can you spot these stress or anxiety issues?
Andy, maybe would you like to take that one? Other signs?
I think it can come from a participationary and from a team environment where everyone gets to participate in something to do with mental health and someone's avoiding it, or it's trying to have an open collaborative way that people can engage. And if someone, that might then open up that opportunity for someone to come forward to say how they're feeling. But if they don't feel that there's a channel of communication to come and put that forward, then there's an avoidance there. So perhaps from being able to, as Shirin said, have some open communication channels more, where people do feel more able to come forward. It's very difficult in a remote environment, what we are experiencing now, whereas when we're in the office, we see someone who perhaps is always at the office, who doesn't leave, or who looks a bit disheveled, or smells of alcohol, or whatever. These are the signs that we pick up, or we can see their mood and isolation. It is very hard at home. So being able to have some key messages that come through from the company is very important. I think the one we started with at the beginning, it's okay to not be okay. If that was to just be put out there so people understand what is actually, it's okay to not feel, oh wow, and there is a phone number, there is someone I can ring to express this. So it's really putting out some key messages to attract people to know that actually we can start talking here. We can start, it's actually okay to talk. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. So there's something, noticing their level of how present are they really, how engaged are they, how fatigued might they look, and trying to open the dialogue. Okay, thank you for the question. So final 30 seconds from each panelist. I'm an optimist. So I'm optimistic that we will learn from this and we will be better people tomorrow. But that's because I spend all my life helping people adapt and grow so they can thrive. But I'm going to stick with that one because I think we have to learn from this. It's been too big a trauma not to. So I believe that we will move forward, and the acceptance without judgment of the corporate mental health agenda will continue to evolve. The question to all of you, in about 30 seconds, how optimistic are you that we emerge from this more resilient and more open to supporting people from a mental health perspective? Jeffrey, shall I start with you?
Sure. I like you, I am an optimist. I think we will emerge from this stronger, but that's sort of the big picture. What would I do if I ask myself to improve and become stronger? Is I think it's a self-recognition. And those of us who are in leadership position, and all of us are, is to be able to recognize that we are not superheroes. All these things that we talked about, the vulnerabilities of stress, doesn't just affect somebody else in our team. It can affect us. And until we can recognize that, I think, and help ourselves, it's kind of difficult to be able to sort of preach this to somebody else and say, you take care because this is important and I don't practice it. And I think that you then have a credibility gap that is there and we just need to close it. At least that's my take on that.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Let me, before I come to Andy and then to Shirin to close, let me just put up your slides of, we're a bit short on time now because we should finish in the next couple of minutes. Do you just want to just tell people what the resources are that we're sending them? This is the first of 2 slides.
Sure. So this talks about the 4 A's that I had shared a little earlier on. If you could go to the next slide, that's where you have got websites, you've got contact numbers. These are available resources here in Singapore. I've also listed Hong Kong and UK, just in case you have got colleagues and friends who might be there and want to be able to reach out to. But there is no shortage. I think, again, this is a demonstration of how mental health has moved to the top of the agenda, is in the limelight. There is available resources to be able to help us through this.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and they will be circulated afterwards, so don't worry, you don't need to take a picture. Andy, your final 30 seconds. How do you feel about the future?
I think we will become more inspired in regards to talking about mental health. I think we will become more resilient and more open and more honest, more authentic. I think one thing I would say to everyone to leave today is, sometimes when we talk about mental health and we have these seminars, people, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to make sure I run every morning, and and it's too much. So what I would like to leave you with is one thing. If you can leave this seminar today with one thing that you are going to do to look after your mental health, and just in the intention every day to do one thing, start small, don't be overwhelmed. The perfectionists out there, and I know you're all listening, will be, I need to do everything and I need to do it so well. Just loosen the grip, suspension of judgment over your mental health. Tend and befriend. Tend and befriend. One thing, just one thing.
Thank you, Andy. So Shirin, I come to you for the final, how you feel about the future, and I'll leave it with you as well to close the session. Thank you for having me today to facilitate. Oh, you're on mute.
You're mute.
I'm always doing that. Thanks very much, Michelle and Jeffrey and Andy. So I will, to answer the question, that's a hard one, right? I mean, I am naturally an optimist. This whole period has been very stressful. I'm glad that we're doing this session this week, because last week, before I took a break on Sentosa over the weekend, I was not ready to have this. It's been overwhelming. It's been a lot. Not just with work and managing the office, but with my son, with my parents, with everything, right? So I think what has come out clearly today is that there are so many different people respond to different things. Different people manifest things in different ways, like we talked about, and also the answers from the audience about how do you decompress. And there's so many different things, and so really there's not there's not one prescription for any of this. And really, the biggest learning for me, for us as a firm, as an organization, has been that people just respond positively to knowing that leadership cares, right? That you set the tone, and however it manifests, however you get help, whatever you need to do to create that space. It's just being able to see that the firm or the organization genuinely cares about you as an individual, including your mental health. And so to come to the conclusion, I think that the pandemic has made people realize how important it is to have a culture of inclusiveness. And really, it's a happier workplace, right? And if you're happier at work, then you're also more efficient and all of that stuff. But just how important it is to be more inclusive than we have been. So, and with that, thank you very much to all of you, to the panelists and to the audience. We have a really big turnout today. And so if you have any questions or you have any follow-up, just email one of us from whom you got the invitation. We just really want to be facilitators of this dialogue and keep it going. So, anything that we can do in that regard. So thanks very much for attending.